King's Landing was choking under its own secrets. The day of Ned Stark's execution arrived like a slow funeral march. The square was full of tension, and everyone expected blood. But what they didn't expect, what changed history, was Joffrey's silence. Cersei had done the impossible, convinced her son to honor Ned's plea for mercy. The blade never fell. Ned Stark was spared, sentenced instead to take the black and live out his days at the Wall. But the world saw this not as mercy, but as humiliation. And while the crowd murmured with confused relief, a storm was already building. In the Red. "Keep!" Sansa wept with joy, while Arya, hidden in the crowd, blinked in disbelief. She was ready to leap toward the stage, ready to kill someone if things had gone the other way. But now, her father lived. Varys whispered to Littlefinger, "This changes everything." Littlefinger just smirked. "Only for now." The raven flew north. Robb Stark read the message with shaking hands. His father lived, but as a brother of the Night's Watch. That wasn't justice. That was spit in their face. The North had already raised its banners, spilled blood in Ned's name. How do you tell a wolf to sit after it's tasted war? Catelyn was torn in half. Relief clawed at her heart, but so did fury. He's alive, but not ours anymore. Still, Robb hesitated. He halted his march south, and that moment of pause allowed new fires to spark across the realm. In King's Landing, Ned sat in a cell, waiting to be sent north. Varys visited, offering water and quiet warnings. "The game is still being played, Lord Stark. Your honor saved you, but it won't save your daughters." That night, Cersei visited too. Her voice was low, dangerous. "You should have died, Stark. I tried to save you, but you know too much. So remember this, one wrong word, and your daughters bleed." Ned bit his tongue. He always thought silence was strength, but this time, silence was survival. When the black-clad brothers arrived to take him to the Wall, Ned didn't resist. Arya tried to follow, but she lost him in the confusion. Yoren stopped her, hiding her away. "Your time will come, girl, but it ain't now." At Winterfell, Bran dreamed of ravens with 3 eyes and wolves with broken chains. He didn't understand it yet, but something was shifting in the very bones of the world. And in the east, across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen held her newborn dragon close, feeling fire stir in her blood. She had no idea the stag and the wolf had just changed course, but her path was already lit with flame. And beyond the Wall, deep in the snow and shadow, the White Walkers marched slowly, silently. None of this mattered to them. Not yet. The cold wind whipped across the Wall as Ned Stark arrived at Castle Black. His face was lined deeper than before, not from age, but from everything he had lost. His position, his freedom, his family. Jon Snow stood watching from atop the ramparts, the letter in his hand forgotten. When he saw his father ride through the gates, his breath caught. "Father?" Ned looked up, and for the first time in weeks, something soft moved behind his eyes. "Jon." They embraced in the yard, but there were too many eyes, too much unspoken weight. Ned wasn't just another man taking the black. He was the Lord of Winterfell, the former hand of the king. His presence sent ripples through the Night's Watch, like a stone dropped in still water. Jon didn't know what to say. He had wanted to leave, to ride with Robb, to fight for the family name. But now his father was here, and with him came secrets. "I need to speak with you," Ned said the first night. They sat alone in the Lord Commander's quarters, the fire low. "There's something you need to know, Jon, about your mother." Jon sat up straighter. For years, Ned had refused to speak of her. "She wasn't who you think," Ned began. But before the truth could spill out, the door burst open. A raven had arrived. Robb Stark had called his bannermen again, not to attack, but to demand. The North would not accept what had been done to their warden. They demanded Ned's return, not to the Wall, but to Winterfell. And if that demand was not met, they would take it by force. Back in King's Landing, Cersei's jaw tightened as she read the Raven. "They still think he's a lord?" she hissed. Joffrey slammed a goblet against the wall. "I spared him. I showed mercy." "Mercy is weakness," Tywin Lannister replied coldly. He had arrived, finally, to take matters into his own hands. "You should have had his head the moment he confessed." Littlefinger, of course, was smiling. "War is like a wildfire. Once lit, it spreads no matter how tightly you try to control it." Meanwhile, Sansa remained a hostage, in all but two name. She begged for news of Arya, unaware that her sister had escaped the city and was hiding under Yoren's wing, traveling north with a shaved head and a sword she barely knew how to hold. Arya was a ghost on the road, haunted, angry, and more alone than ever. She didn't trust anyone, not even the Night's Watch recruits beside her. And far to the east, Daenerys stood before the pyres of her enemies, with dragons growing stronger. By the day, she no longer dreamed of reclaiming her throne. She began to plan for it. At Castle Black, Maester Aemon warned Ned that the Wall was no place for politics. "The dead are rising, and your enemies are the least of your worries." But Ned had one goal: protect his children. He couldn't return to the North. He couldn't play the game. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could give Jon what he never had. He reached into the folds of his cloak and placed a letter on the table. "If I die again," he said, "give this to Jon. He deserves to know the truth." Above them, the wind howled like a hungry wolf, and in the shadows of the north, something ancient stirred beneath the ice. The raven that carried Robb Stark's demand never returned. Somewhere in the Vale, it vanished, intercepted, silenced. Maybe by Littlefinger, maybe by someone worse. Either way, Cersei never intended to answer it. She was done pretending diplomacy could hold the North. Now she wanted obedience. But the North had never bowed easily. Robb, young but hardened, was no longer just a boy playing at war. He had tasted blood. And when the silence came from the capital, he knew what it meant. "Prepare the men," he said to Rose Bolton. "We ride at dawn." Catelyn pleaded, with him to wait, to think. "Your father is alive, Robb. He's safe. Don't provoke more war." "He's not safe," Robb snapped. "He's in chains. You think the Lannisters will let him live once we kneel? I'd rather die fighting than see another Stark caged." The bannermen roared in agreement. The North was on fire again, only this time it burned colder, and more cruelly. Back at Castle Black, Jon was restless. Having his father near him should have been a comfort, but it wasn't. There were things unsaid, dark, heavy, things that clung to the air between them. Ned had been different since he arrived. He was quieter, more watchful. He stood at the wall and stared into the white beyond, like it whispered things no one else could hear. Jon finally confronted him. "You said there was something about my mother. You never told me." Ned sighed. "You deserve to know. But not here. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because the moment I tell you, your life will change. And I don't know if I'll be alive to guide you through it." Jon didn't ask again, but from that day he carried the silence like a blade tucked under his ribs. Meanwhile, Arya was learning what it meant to survive without a name. With Yoren and the Night's Watch recruits, she traveled through towns torn by war, where small folk were crushed beneath the boots of knights and gold cloaks alike. She didn't cry anymore. She didn't pray. All she did was whisper names before bed: Cersei, Joffrey, Eiland Payne, and sometimes Littlefinger. She didn't know yet that one of them had already found her. Back in the Red Keep, Varys watched everything unfold with spider-like calm. "Lord Stark lives," he told Tyrion. But for how long? Tyrion, now hand in place of his absent father, wasn't so sure. If the North attacks again, the boy king will want blood. Stark's head will be the first thing he demands, and your sister will hand it to him. Tyrion exhaled. She'll ruin us all before winter even arrives. But it had already arrived, just not where they expected. North of the wall, the dead had begun to stir. Rangers disappeared in ones and twos. Cold hands crept through snowdrifts. Even the direwolves howled uneasily. Samwell Tarly saw something in the woods, something with blue eyes that didn't blink, and when he tried to tell Jon, the words died in his throat. At Castle Black, Master Aemon fell ill, muttering riddles in his fever. The cold comes for kings and bastards alike, and blood in the snow, truth in the fire. No one knew what it meant. But down in the dungeons of King's Landing, Sansa learned the cost of survival. Cersei had grown colder since Ned's escape. She kept Sansa close, made her watch things no girl should see, whisper lies, smile at monsters. She was training her not to be a queen, but a weapon. Sansa hated her. But worse, a small, poisonous part of her started to understand her, and far away, on winds of fire, Daenerys received word of Westeros again, of a king too young, a queen too mad, and a wolf still breathing. She smiled. Let them fight, I'll come when they've bled each other dry. The game had changed. Ned Stark lived, but the world was unraveling faster than anyone could stop it, and deep beneath the wall, something ancient opened its eyes. The wall stood tall as ever, a frozen spine holding back the dark. But cracks were forming, not just in the ice, but in the men who guarded it. Ned could feel it. The Night's Watch was not what it once was. It was a place for broken men, for thieves and cowards. But more importantly, it was unprepared. He spent his days patrolling the grounds with Jon, watching him grow harder, sharper. Jon had changed since Ned's arrival, more cautious, more burdened. And though Ned hadn't yet told him the truth, he knew time was running thin. Something is wrong beyond the wall, Jon told him after a patrol. Rangers are vanishing, and the ones who come back, they don't come back whole. Ned said nothing, but that night he wrote another letter. One not to Robb, but to Catelyn. It would never reach her. A crow never left Castle Black with it. Something, or someone, was stopping the ravens now. In the north, Robb pushed deeper into enemy territory, striking fast and quiet. He didn't want war. He wanted leverage, the kind that would force the Lannisters to release his father from his vows to the Watch, something only a king or death could undo. He still didn't know about the letter that never came, but others noticed Robb's movements. Rose Bolton, quiet and calculating, watched every decision the young wolf made. He offered advice, but never loyalty. The flayed man never bowed forever. In King's Landing, Tyrion struggled to keep the realm balanced. The boy king's cruelty had grown. Without Ned's execution to satisfy his thirst, Joffrey turned his rage on lesser victims, small folk, servants, even Sansa. She's his plaything now, Cersei whispered over wine. Let her bleed a little. She'll survive. Tyrion disagreed. She may survive, but she'll remember. And people like her. They don't forget. Varys moved quietly in the shadows. The wolves are not done howling, my lord, and dragons. They stir in the east. Tyrion looked up sharply. Dragons? 3, and a girl who's no longer a girl. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys stood before a city in chains. She had freed its slaves, set fire to its masters, and now ruled over dust and ash. She was no longer scared. She was becoming something else, something colder. Her dragons grew restless, feeding on more than just meat. They liked the scent of fear, and Dany liked what that power did to men. But at night, she still dreamed of the Iron Throne, and of the man who once sat beside it. The last honorable man, the Stark. Back in Westeros, Arya's path darkened. She had watched her first man die, a soldier who tried to drag her into the woods. She had stabbed him with needle again and again until he stopped moving. Yoren said nothing. He only cleaned the blade and told her, "You're one of us now." But she wasn't. She was something else, something forming in the black. She still whispered the names. Back at the wall, Jon took his vows fully, even though part of him ached for more. He wanted to follow Robb, to fight beside him, to see Winterfell again. But duty bound him, and now, so did his father. One night, as the cold howled outside, Ned finally handed him the letter. "Don't read it now. Read it when the time comes." "When will that be?" "You'll know." But they didn't know the time was already upon them. The horn blew once, then twice, then a third time. Jon froze. "3 blasts!" "Means White Walkers," Ned finished, already reaching for his sword. Men screamed on the ramparts. Torches flared. Something moved through the snow like a sickness, like death on legs. Eyes the color of shattered glass, skin stretched too tight. The dead had come, and all of Westeros was still busy fighting the wrong war. The dead did not charge like men. They crawled forward in silence, snow whispering beneath bone and rotted leather. Their eyes burned blue, empty but alive, as if something old and hungry looked through them. The first to die was a boy no older than Jon. He didn't even scream. The White tore out his throat and kept moving, dragging part of the gate with him. Castle Black erupted into chaos. "Hold the gate!" Jon roared, sword drawn, panic bubbling just beneath his voice. He hadn't been trained for this. No one had. The Night's Watch drilled for wildlings, for cold, starvation, even mutiny. But not for this. Ned Stark stood beside him, sword in hand, his face as still as the snow. For a moment he looked like the man he had been during Robert's rebellion. Not a fallen lord, not a traitor spared, but a warrior. Together they fought back the tide. Jon's blade, Longclaw, burned blue as it slashed into the undead. Ned's steel was less effective, but his rage was pure and cold, and his strikes were precise. For every white that fell, 2 more climbed over. It's Sam, half mad with terror, managed to stab one with dragonglass. It crumpled instantly. "Dragonglass works," he screamed, eyes wide and wet. "Then pass it around." Ned shouted, grabbing a pouch of the black glass from a nearby crate and flinging it to a group of brothers cornered by a snarling corpse. Hours passed like minutes. Fire raged across the ramparts. Men died screaming. The wall shook, but it held, barely. By dawn, the dead began to fall back, not in fear, but as if summoned, as if something larger had pulled them away. The survivors barely noticed. They were too busy bleeding, weeping, gasping. Castle Black had survived the night, but at a cost. Jon stood in the courtyard panting, his cloak soaked in sweat and blood. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "They will," Ned replied, "and next time they won't come alone." Far to the south, Robb Stark's war had changed. Word of the attack had reached him, not through Raven, but through rumor. "Dead things," men whispered around the fire. "A war in the snow." Most didn't believe it, but Robb did. He burned a map that night, watching the paper curl. "We've been fighting the wrong enemy." Rose Bolton tilted his head. "Then shall we go home and wait for the dead to march to our doors?" "No," Robb said. "We ride north." Bolton's eyes glinted. "To rescue your father, to protect him." But not everyone agreed. The bannermen were tired. They wanted victory, not more cold, more uncertainty. Some whispered treason, some whispered retreat, and one whispered to Tywin Lannister. In King's Landing, the court laughed at the stories. "Frozen corpses?" Joffrey mocked. "This is the kind of nonsense Northerners believe in when they're drunk on pine sap," Cersei sneered. "Let them freeze. Fewer wolves to worry about." But Tyrion didn't laugh. He stood on the balcony that night, drinking in silence. "What if it's true?" he asked Varys. The spider's voice was flat. "Then the game we're playing is already lost." Arya heard about the dead too. A farmer whispered it as she passed through a frost-bitten village. "Wall nearly fell, they say. The dead walk again. We're all just meat now." She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just held Needle tighter and whispered her list one more time. "Cersei, Joffrey, Elyn Payne. The dead can wait. I've got the living to kill first." In the east, Daenerys looked into a fire, her hand resting on the scaled neck of a dragon. "They think winter is their only enemy," she whispered, "but I am coming too." The flames twisted into shapes, ice and fire clashing, shadows of wolves and lions drowning in snow. She smiled. "Let them all freeze. The throne will still be mine." And at the wall, Jon watched the blackened gate. "They'll come again." Ned placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll be ready." But Jon's eyes were already distant. The truth pulled at him. The letter burned in his chest like a second heartbeat. He hadn't opened it, but soon he would. And when he did, the truth would change not just his fate, but the fate of every living soul in Westeros. The morning after the attack, Castle Black buried its dead. There weren't enough shovels for the bodies. Some were burned, some hacked into pieces just to stop them from twitching again. No one spoke much. Grief weighed heavier than the snow. Jon sat alone in the library tower, the sealed letter from his father gripped tight in his hand. He had stared at it for hours. The wax still bore the Stark direwolf, cracked and chipped now. It felt wrong to open it, but worse not to. He finally broke the seal. The words were simple, not long, not dramatic, but they split the ground beneath his feet. "You are not my son. Your mother was Lyanna Stark. Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen. I lied to protect you. Forgive me." Jon stared at the paper until the ink blurred. Everything he had ever believed about himself, his place in the world, the shame he had worn since boyhood, was a lie. He wasn't a bastard. He wasn't even a Stark. He was fire and ice. The son of a dragon prince and a wolf girl, and now he had no idea who the hell he was supposed to be. He didn't tell Ned that night. He didn't speak at all. He walked the wall until his legs froze and his lungs burned, but the storm in his chest only got worse. Below, the brothers whispered. They saw Jon differently now, not just as the Lord Commander's steward or a brave fighter. There was something else in his eyes, a weight, a distance. He kept his father's letter folded against his heart like armor. Meanwhile, Robb was marching north. The further he rode, the colder it became, and not just in weather. His men grew quiet, tension thickened, and Rose Bolton, ever the observer, began planting seeds. "We march into snow while the lions laugh in their castles. Perhaps the young wolf is chasing ghosts instead of crowns." Robb heard the whispers, but ignored them. "If the wall falls, the kingdom falls. My father's there. My brother too." But Bolton wasn't interested in brothers. He was interested in power, and he wasn't the only one. Back in King's Landing, Tyrion received a raven. Not from the north, but from a spy. It spoke of Jon, Snow's true parentage, of Ned Stark's secret. He poured himself wine and stared at the parchment. A Targaryen, raised as a Stark. He almost laughed. Poetic, but dangerous. Varys nodded slowly. "He has the blood of kings, and the loyalty of wolves." Tyrion rubbed his temples, which means every faction will want him dead before he even knows who he is. He looked out the window at the rising sun. Gods help us if he figures it out before we do. In the east, Daenerys stood atop the walls of a conquered city, the wind whipping her silver hair. Her dragons circled above like living storms. Jorah brought her news, vague whispers of a man in the north, a boy with Targaryen blood, possibly her kin. "Does he seek the throne?" she asked. Jorah hesitated. Not yet, but he's waking up. And he has the North behind him. Dany didn't smile. Then he's already a threat. Arya reached Harrenhal disguised as a boy. No one noticed her, not truly, not when so many were dying. She served Lannister men, listened to war councils, memorized faces. One night she heard a name, a quiet conversation in the corner, Roose Bolton, planning something dark. She didn't understand it yet, but it made her stomach twist. She whispered his name that night too, adding him to the list, and a shadow passed over her heart. At the wall, Ned noticed the change in Jon, the quiet, the burden. You rid it. Jon nodded once. You lied to protect me. I get it. I would do it again, Ned said. I know. But Jon didn't say thank you. He couldn't, not yet. Instead, he asked, do you think the North will follow me, if they know what I am? Ned was silent for a long time. Then, you're my son in all the ways that matter, but the world doesn't see what's true. It sees what's useful. Jon looked away. Then they'll use me, or kill me. And below, in the shadows of the wall, something else stirred. Something ancient, something not quite dead. Because the White Walkers weren't retreating. They were gathering, waiting. And Jon Snow, Targaryen or Stark, was about to be the name they whispered in their own dead tongue. The North always prided itself on strength, on loyalty. But that loyalty had a limit, and Roose Bolton had found it. As Robb Stark marched toward the wall, Bolton slipped riders through the snow. Quiet ones, men with sharp tongues and sharper blades. Their mission wasn't to defend the North, it was to take it. And they started with Winterfell. The castle stood abandoned by Robb's main force, guarded only by a skeleton crew. Bran and Rickon had been hidden away under Maester Luwin's watch, kept out of the politics. But when Bolton's men came dressed in northern cloaks, no one suspected treachery until the gates closed behind them. Winterfell burned before the first scream even finished. The flayed man flew above the ramparts by dusk. Bran saw it all, from the crypts. His legs useless, his heart a storm. Hodor held him close, while Mira and Jojen whispered escape plans. The wolves are gone, Bran said, eyes wide with something else. But they'll come back with teeth. He didn't mean his family. He meant the dead. Farther north, Robb didn't know yet. His war was aimed at survival, not power. He reached the gift near the wall, with fewer men than he'd started with and far less faith. Then the Raven came, one of the few that got through. Winterfell has fallen. Bolton holds it. Bran and Rickon, unknown. Robb didn't speak for an hour. Then he stood. We ride tonight. No more alliances, no more politics. We burn the flayed man off our walls. Some men cheered. Some didn't. Rose's whisper campaign had done its job. Fear and doubt were growing like frostbite, and Robb was too angry to notice. At Castle Black, Jon Snow was changing, not just because of the truth in his blood, but because leadership was being forced upon him. The Night's Watch was broken, too many dead, too many afraid. They looked to Jon, not because they trusted him, but because he had survived the impossible. The vote for Lord Commander came quietly, and Jon didn't ask for it, but he didn't refuse either. Ned watched from the shadows, both proud and unsettled. He remembered another Targaryen boy once, one who smiled before he went to war. Rhaegar had been noble too, until power ate him from the inside. He prayed Jon would stay better, but prayers didn't carry far past the wall. And then came the second Raven, Winterfell, fallen. Ned read the letter twice, then he folded it, slowly, carefully, and walked to his son. Robb will march, he won't stop. I know. And you? What will you do? Jon looked north, past the wall, toward the shadows. I'll hold the line. In Harrenhal, Arya Stark took her first life not in fear, but in calm. She slipped into Roose Bolton's tent at night with a stolen blade and a heart made of stone. But it wasn't Bolton inside. It was a decoy, a double. He knew she was coming. His real camp was already on the move, racing north, fortified by Lannister gold and whispers of betrayal. Arya vanished again, chased by mercenaries. But she left 3 bodies behind, one with a Bolton sigil, one with a Lannister ring, and one with his throat carved into the word liar. She was done being quiet. She was done being small. Now she hunted. Back in the east, Daenerys was preparing her fleet, not for conquest, but for arrival. Westeros was calling her home, and she had dragons to answer it. She didn't care who sat the throne now, Starks, Lannisters, bastards. She would burn through all of them. Then came a raven, slow and half-dead, but still marked with the sigil of the old Targaryen hand. Inside, a name. Jon. She held it in her hands like it burned. "A cousin?" she asked aloud. "No," she whispered after a long pause. "A rival." At Castle Black, the wind had turned again, bitterer than before. The White Walkers had retreated after their first strike, but not because they were beaten. They had been scouting, and they found what they needed. The wall, for all its ancient magic, was beginning to crack, and Jon Snow, now Lord Commander, could feel it. In his bones, in his blood, in the ghosts he saw in every fire. He stood at the top of the wall with Ned beside him. The silence between them stretched long. Finally, Jon said, "I know who I am now." Ned turned, his face unreadable. "And I know what's coming." Below them, in the snow, the first horn blew once, then twice, then 3 times again. But this time it didn't stop. The horns wouldn't stop. 3 blasts, over and over, echoed through the wall like a heartbeat from the grave. Men scrambled, torches lit. Fear, the kind that doesn't have words, rippled through Castle Black. Jon stood at the top of the wall, wind tearing at his cloak, staring into the white. But this time there was no silence, no quiet stalking. The dead came screaming, a tide of ice and bone, whites by the thousands, snowstorms wrapped around them like cloaks, and at the center of it all, atop a pale horse, rode the Night King, silent, crowned in frost, his eyes locked on Jon Snow. "This is it," Jon said. Ned stood beside him. "I know. Tell me we can win." Ned didn't lie. He never had. "We can fight." That was enough. The battle hit like a blizzard full of teeth. The wall shook with every impact. The first breach came at the eastern gate, where fire ran out too fast and steel proved worthless. The whites piled atop each other, clawing, screaming, dying only when burned or pierced with dragonglass. Jon led from the front. Longclaw sang. Sam fought behind him, wild with fear and fury. Ned, older, slower, but still a Stark, killed like it meant something, and for a time they held, but not forever. A crack shattered the sky. A bolt of blue fire arced down from above, and from the clouds came him, Viserion. Once Daenerys' dragon, now a weapon of the dead. His wings were torn, his flesh rotten. But he burned just the same. The wall exploded. Ice rained down like stone. Brothers were flung like dolls. Fires vanished in a hiss, and Castle Black began to fall. Jon awoke buried in snow and ash, ears ringing. He coughed blood. He couldn't hear the horns anymore, but he could see the Night King walking through the wreckage, raising his arms. More dead stood up around him, black-cloaked brothers, men Jon had known. Even... "No," Jon whispered, crawling. Even Ned Stark. Ned, pierced through the chest, eyes turning ice blue, stared at him, blank, empty, his sword dragged behind him. Jon screamed, "No, you're not him, you're not!" The Night King smiled without smiling. And then came the fire. From the clouds above, something else roared, living fire this time. Drogon and Rhaegal dove from the sky, flame pouring from their jaws. Daenerys had arrived. She hit the dead like a comet. Drogon bathed them in fire. Rhaegal smashed through the horde with wings of death. Dany, in her saddle, screamed, "Burn them all!" The Night King looked up, Unmoved, he raised a hand, and Viserion met his brothers in the sky. The dragons clashed above the burning wall, fire against ice, kin against kin. Below, Jon crawled to Ned's body, shaking. "Forgive me," he whispered, and drove dragonglass into his father's heart. Ned's eyes closed for the last time, peaceful, and Jon Snow, no longer just Snow, stood. "I am the shield that guards the realms of men," he whispered, voice broken. "I am fire and ice." When the battle was done, nothing was left but ruin. Castle Black was ash. The wall was cracked in half. Most of the Night's Watch was dead. The rest were scattered. But Jon Snow had survived. Barely. So had Daenerys. They met amid the smoking ice, bloodied and exhausted. "You're him," she said, "the boy they hid." "You came," he said. "Why?" "Because I want the throne, and because you're not alone anymore." They looked at each other, Targaryen and Targaryen, ice and fire, blood and war. And behind them, the Night King retreated, not defeated but wounded. He would come again, but so would they. In the wreckage of the North, Robb reclaimed Winterfell, not through blood, but through survival. The Boltons had overreached. The North rose up, wolves baring teeth, but Robb was not whole. His brothers were gone. His mother had vanished. Arya, missing. Sansa, still hostage. He had saved the house, but it cost him the family. Arya disappeared into the Riverlands. She left corpses in her wake. Boltons, Lannisters, anyone who fed the flames. She didn't want to be a lady. She didn't want revenge anymore. She wanted peace. So she headed for Braavos. Sansa, in King's Landing, became colder. She watched. She learned. And one day when Joffrey fell dead at his wedding, face purple, lips foaming, she didn't smile. But she didn't cry either. Tyrion vanished in the chaos, Varys with him. The game had broken open, and somewhere far away Bran Stark opened his eyes in a dream of ravens, and never closed them again. Jon stood on a new wall now, one built, of ash and fire. Beside Daenerys, behind them survivors, ahead another war, but this time they knew what they were fighting for. Not just the throne, not just revenge, but life.